Hello, folks. Another episode of Burning Platform. A real pleasure to have George Gilbert today. George and I go back, George, what is it, 25 years, probably?
25 years, late 90s.
Well, you were on Wall Street, Credit Suisse.
Yes.
I was at Gartner. And we run into each other every couple of years. And I saw you at Google Next recently. And I thought, hey, let's talk to George about the whole world of generative AI and everything. Let's catch up. So welcome. Tell the world, brag about yourself for a couple of minutes.
Well, after Wall Street, I did consulting, some for SAP for a couple of years, and Lawson, which became part of Infor.
Right.
And I was an analyst at Giga, at SiliconANGLE on theCUBE, and at Gartner, and I'm a contributing analyst on theCUBE right now. And I've been mostly following the platform wars, the hyperscalers and the ISVs on those platforms, and as they're growing up to be the new development tools for enterprises for building custom applications.
That is quite a word, isn't it? I mean, when you look around the world, I'm working on a global project. It's amazing how the hyperscalers have made DevOps so consistent around the world. Let's talk a little bit about that, but let's focus more on AI. Talk about what you saw at Google Next. What are you seeing from AWS? What are you seeing from Azure? What are you seeing from Oracle? Talk about the world of hyperscalers.
Okay, so Gen AI is the biggest accelerant this industry has ever seen. And let me break that down and explain why. We've all gone through, well, most of us have lived through the transition to the GUI, the browser, mobile phone, and the cloud, which sort of came along at the same time as mobile. The GUI, the browser, and mobile were accelerants of demand. They allowed software to be used or accessed in entirely new contexts and opened it up to new users. That accelerated demand. The cloud was an accelerant of supply in the fact that it made it easier to programmatically deploy and run big applications. But we've never had a transition or a new technology that accelerated both demand and supply, which Gen AI does. And specifically, it, as we all know, it allows software to be used in new contexts and by new people, because you can interact with it in natural language. Soon it'll be like an agent, like a Siri that you can give instructions to it and it'll go off and do stuff on your behalf. That's accelerating the demand side. Now, we all remember, most of us remember what the web browser did in terms of demand for software. Once you had the browser and you could visit all these new applications, which we called websites, that created demand, explosive demand for building huge websites. Now, the browser didn't actually help you build the new websites. Gen AI is its first killer application, its real killer application, other than as a conversational interface, is to write software. It doesn't do it completely for you, but it dramatically raises the productivity of developers, and not just like code completion, but writing the glue code between the building block services of the hyperscalers and writing the code to deploy and monitor and soon remediate applications. It doesn't turn infrastructure as a service completely into platform as a service, but it does start to close that gap, the gap in complexity. So it's greatly increasing the demand for software, and it's making it much easier to build that software. That we've never seen before.
Let's come back to the supply side that you talked about, increasing coder productivity, right? Let's come back to how is that going to affect the outsourcing market? It would seem like that would be it could be an existential threat, at least in some components of that. Let's come back to that. Let me tell you what I'm seeing from the application vendors. Same kind of excitement, right? A lot of excitement around, hey, it'll allow me to, change chatbots. It'll allow me to change my employee profiles. I mean, just make it a lot richer, right? The question I ask is, why are you building your own LLMs? Why are you, kind of like, why aren't you going to be just inundated by what the hyperscalers are doing in that area, right? Or even OpenAI, right? In the end, how do you compete against Google or an AWS, their own models and so on? Where do you see the friction coming in the technology sector?
There's a couple things going on in there. Let's unpack the meta comment, which is the application vendors versus the hyperscalers. Because what you're really getting at is what happens when you want to build custom software beyond sort of the out-of-the-box horizontal applications or out-of-the-box even vertical applications. Because, we spent 50 years automating, as we were talking about earlier, the financials and the HR and, even the order management was relatively horizontal, even if it was configurable. But it's now you want software to run the business processes that are particular to your industry and even to your company. And so we're seeing this sort of clash between a platform that comes with an enterprise application that you use to extend the enterprise application, like Salesforce was really the first one out there with Apex, and now they finally got a data cloud, because data is how you can't just have the code. You need data, a custom place to extend what's in the horizontal app.
I was at Dreamforce last week. A lot of data clouds really come a long way. It's gone through iterations. It was called Genie last year. It's come a long way, and you're right. It is the foundation of all the AI.
And so I think so. Your meta point, which is where do the application vendors sort of hit the hyperscalers? The hyperscalers are trying to make it easier and easier to build custom enterprise applications. It used to be sort of web and mobile, but it's the meta point is you're building applications that you can't buy. And then the packaged application vendors are trying to make it easier and easier to build custom apps, but on their platforms. Now, their DNA, as you know, is probably even better than I do, that the DNA of a packaged app vendor is very different from the DNA of a platform vendor. And the application vendors have struggled for decades to build tools on a real extensible platform. And Salesforce is getting better, but it's not all there. Now, I didn't see all the details of what's new, this year. But, Microsoft, Google, and Amazon have spent essentially 15 years building their tool sets out to be rather coherent, on the cloud platform. They sell hardware, but what customers are really buying is the services to make that, to build applications on that.
It sounds like the hyperscaler is a much better position than application vendors when it comes to this. Did I understand you correctly?
I would tweak that just to say the hyperscalers and the incumbent application vendors. And let me explain why. On the hyperscalers, they have a set of building block services where the Gen AI can now generate the glue code for how to get the services to talk to each other. That's the sort of the scut work that like a co-pilot can do for you. It doesn't architect your application or do the differentiated functionality, but it does the heavy lifting, not just how to glue the services together, but how to deploy and help you monitor them. That shrinks the complexity gap between infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. Platform, had less flexibility, but it was much simpler. That gap is shrinking. Now, and just to put a finer point on that, that favors vendors where their services were designed to work together, Google and Azure, who have essentially opinionated services. Amazon had always favored more services so that they could offer power and choice, but the services didn't always fit together. For instance, their data warehouse doesn't really talk to their data lake. So you don't have a data-centric data platform. That, glue code can't really fix. So I believe just the way 25 years ago, the rise of the web created a premium for Solaris, Oracle, EMC, and Veritas because it was scalable, reliable, and secure. And it made the Microsoft back office disadvantaged because it wasn't really mature enough for large-scale websites. It was good for small and medium-sized businesses. So it favored that Sun, Oracle, EMC stack. And so I think this will shine a light on the Google and Microsoft stacks relative to the Amazon stack. In other words, where fit and convenience now are a premium. Now, on the application vendor side, I think this favors the incumbents in the early stages over new application vendors because AI is programmed by data, including the Gen AI stuff. And it's not just raw data, it's organized data. So it's a data model.
Domain specific expectations.
Yes. Yep. To use an example, like the Salesforce cloud now has a data cloud with a graph. The graph says this is how it all hangs together. So when you get the instance data, the AI knows how to make sense out of it. Just like the Microsoft graph knows how to connect all the people, projects, tasks, and documents in an organization so that the assistant that's built into Teams knows how to work across an organization. That's why this favors application incumbents right now. So hyperscalers with opinionated services and incumbent application vendors who not only have data, but who have organized the data.
And I suspect, the same thing would apply to SAP and verticals. And
yes.
We're going to see Workday Rising next week. And, that in the HR and financial accounting and procurement areas will benefit that hardware. So let's come back to even the custom use cases, right? What are you seeing getting funded? Because here's a conversation I've had with a couple of customers, which is, my God, NVIDIA is doing amazingly well because GPUs are not cheap, right? So if GPUs are not cheap and Accenture is not cheap, all these are adding up to a significant cost of developing an open Gen AI application, right? Or use case. So I would think people would say, I'm going to use it for drug discovery. I'm going to use it for mineral insight, all the really high payback stuff, given all the data people have, oil companies have, and pharmaceutical companies have, and so on, right? That would seem like a logical use. What are you seeing that is not as industry specific or domain specific that's going to be a killer app?
It's software development and deployment and monitoring. In other words, it's not customers building these things, it's customers using AI, the Gen AI baked into tools that the cloud vendors have created. And now like Salesforce has shown Gen AI tools that you can use to extend the Salesforce applications. I don't see a lot yet of enterprise customers fine-tuning Gen AI models or certainly not building their own. The ones who are doing that are ISVs. And the whole bit about the scarcity of NVIDIA GPUs, this is exactly like Cisco was in the late 90s. People are double and triple ordering because there's, they want to make sure they get some allocation.
Allocation, right.
The problem is that there's a lot of work going on that's going to make really just to address the GPU issue, there's a lot of work going on to make the inference costs come down, way down. Because right now, the inference is so expensive that like for example, if Google were to run Gen AI under search so that, they synthesized each answer the way ChatGPT does, it would add 400 million a day to their cost basis. Now, there's a whole variety of techniques coming along to bring that way down. So the GPU shortage is going to go away probably within 12 months. And we're already hearing, we're already hearing rumors of order cuts to NVIDIA, at least, on the margin. It could be rumors, but we're going to solve that problem. That's not where the value is being created. And by the way, we saw from Google that they anticipated this problem like 10 years ago and started designing their own TPUs. So they're not constrained by the GPU shortage. And that's why you saw in the case of Google Cloud Next, you saw Gen AI in every single developer surface, not just service, but any place there's a developer UI or essentially API, there's Gen AI, including for deployment and monitoring. And that's the killer app. And you're seeing that also, with Salesforce, for example, where they did a really good job now of putting Gen AI, not just to help you navigate the user interface and not just for trivial stuff like customizing a contact with a customer, but synthesizing what's gone on with the customer and recommending a course of action. So right now, the skills required to really apply these are being used by the hyperscale platform vendors, by the application vendors embedding it within their products to make it easier for users to navigate and for developers to customize. And then over time, we'll see new use cases emerge in the form of, tools that customers can apply easily.
So the other thing I'm hearing is caution around, hey, it's my data. And, it's fine for OpenAI to come up with all these, for ChatGPT to come up with, but they're using the web, the consumer web, right? My data is unique, my data is mine, right? Is at least from some executives I've talked to, and Benioff last week kind of beat up on that. He goes, trust is important, and we'll take care of your data and so on, right? You think it's being overemphasized, the LLM gobbling up your data and opening it up to everybody?
It's a bit of FUD, and the FUD works, and that's why folks like Benioff are pounding it, pounding that theme, because like as OpenAI said, we don't train on your data. And from Microsoft, you can get a virtual private cloud with your own instance, so that the data isn't even going, back to anyone other than that instance of OpenAI. In other words, it's not going even to Microsoft. But people are. It wasn't introduced. When the OpenAI service was introduced, they didn't make it clear enough that data wasn't going to be used. So that fear around your private data being accessed became a marketing theme for anyone trying to sell against OpenAI. But we're going to have, we have open source models, we have virtual private clouds and your own private instance of a model. So that issue is going to go away pretty quickly.
Even though customers don't want their data shared with others. I mean, one of the big paybacks on the cloud is benchmarking across customers, right? But customers have been very careful about allowing that. It's like NIMBY, right? Oh yeah, I love all that benchmark, but don't use my data, right? So you're not hearing enough of a concern around customer permissions, customer.
There is that concern, but I guess what I'm trying to say from a feature point of view, it's going to be addressed from multiple angles, like either run your own instance of a API based model like OpenAI or Google, or running an open source model where you physically control the bits. You even have access to the weights if you choose. So it's like you could run it on your own hardware if you choose. That it's a concern, but from a technical point of view, it's either been addressed or you're going to have more options to address it different ways. So it's more of I think it's more of a concern that has to be marketed around. It's not a technical issue anymore.
The way I see it, it's almost like if you have enough data and you just want to apply an LLM to your data, that your protections you talk about clearly are around. But if you want the benefit of a population of customer peers and so on, you really got to be able to share that. Otherwise, you won't get the benefit. You can't just pretend to benchmark just yourself. So, I mean, I'm agreeing with you a bit, but I see a lot more hesitation than you may be seeing because of the, hey, look, my data is going to end up polluted by or shared with others. So, let's what else are you hearing in terms of caution? Because I hear things like hallucinations and audit trails and stuff like that. Again, overemphasized, or what are you hearing?
No, those are bigger issues. And I understand the caution issue that you've been hearing, and I've heard it, but I think you're closer to it. I'm saying that the technical solutions to the privacy issue, you're going to have more and more options to resolve that. There's already ways to resolve it now, but there are going to be even more options imminently. The hallucination and the audit trail, those are difficult or more difficult issues. Audit trail, you're going to have in tools like Vertex AI or Azure ML, and maybe eventually Amazon Bedrock, which is somewhat further behind, where every essentially prompt and the response to the prompt can be tagged in a log or tracked in a log. That's not too difficult technically. We'll see that before the end of the year. At least it'll be shown, if not shipped. The hallucination is a more difficult issue, and the vendors are working on it. But one way around that is this retrieval augmented generation pattern, which is where you feed in to the model in the meta prompt. You feed in all the relevant documents that you want synthesized. Now, there are limitations on that right now, which is most of the models have a limited context window. Like the largest OpenAI one is 32,000 tokens, which is like 25,000 words. And that's the very largest one on GPT-4. Anthropic has 100,000 tokens. And the performance isn't great when you have a bigger context window, but when you send in what you want synthesized through that prompt or meta prompt, you are greatly limiting the chances for hallucination, because you're basically telling the model to synthesize from only the information that you're sending it. And that's why everyone's got a vector database, and they're creating these embeddings so that you send to the vector database, you say, this is my question. It turns that into a vector, and it looks for all the documents that match or close to that vector. It sends them to the LLM. That limits the hallucination, but that also, you're limited again by how much information you can send to the model.
But let's go back to semantics. I've talked to a few customers in industrial settings. They're like, to me, the payback from predictive analytics, the predictive AI, especially around my large assets, so predictive maintenance or predictive demand forecasting and complex supply chains, that's a far bigger payback for me than some Gen AI around documents or around some HR-centric function. Have you heard any of that?
Yes, in the sense that all the killer use cases I see right now belong to ISVs for Gen AI. And so, it's augmenting the user interface so that there's a more powerful way to navigate than just the GUI. Or it's, a better way in the developer tool to build software. Like if you look at Microsoft's Power Platform, there's Gen AI across the whole thing, so that what was just a low-code, no-code tool now can actually be much more powerful in generating code, or like we were talking about earlier, all the tools to generate code for the hyperscalers services. So your question about, is this really for corporates yet? I think the answer is, it's only for totally new use cases that have to do with synthesizing information that's basically,
That's why I was broadening that AI definition, right? Because it's not
yes.
just an AI. And some of the folks I've talked to have said, frankly, predictive AI to me is much, much, much bigger, because they have big assets to predict maintenance around, or big supply chains to predict demand forecast around. So sorry, go ahead, finish your
Well, I was just going to say, what you're describing is like you're making concrete, like this amorphous sort of feeling, which is that the Gen AI is for new use cases. It doesn't replace the predictive stuff. And the Gen AI itself it's sort of a transition period before we get to agents, which then do stuff on behalf of a user, and they're not completely autonomous. It's sort of like you give it a task and you will supervise it. And some of those tasks might be, working with data that's predictive from the predictive AI models. It might be how to clean data, or it might be if a prediction comes back that it's time for, these items need maintenance, then it's how to arrange the maintenance, that sort of thing. So they'll build on each other.
I like the continuum. And Salesforce last week presented on Gen AI was 2, and agents was 3rd in their case too. And the 4th one was, the real AI vision that we've had for 50 years, so.
Like the Knowledge Navigator from 1987.
Even before, you can go back to the 1960s, right? We've been talking about AI for a long time. In fact, I think Stanley Kubrick made a movie around it, did he? Before we finish, one question on productivity, right? So have you thought about what this does to the development and ops community? My God, if it's going to be that productive, is it going to dramatically shrink the need for Indian outsourcers or even Accentures of the world?
I think you're touching on what to me is like the biggest issue around that, around tech and AI in general, which is, just humor me for a sec. We've basically part of the political polarization in this country is that we've got a knowledge society, and then we've got basically a service economy that's kind of been left behind from all the acceleration and productivity, and there's resentment, and it's almost kind of understandable. And getting to your point more specifically about the Indian outsourcers, where you have sort of a lot of medium skill labor for hire, I think what's happening with this stuff is it does accelerate productivity. It doesn't replace people so much, but what it may do is accelerate the superstar kind of economy, where people who were basically, I don't know better term, but a knuckle dragging type programmer who, did a lot of, low level.
Good enough, right?
Yeah, those people may be at risk. This doesn't do architecture. It doesn't, figure out how everything fits together.
George, I wrote a book a few years ago. I looked at automation, broader, robotics and drones, and I looked at 100 years of automation. And basically, I found that automation attacks individual tasks. It never really replaces complete jobs. Human body is amazing. If you do the same task over and over again, yeah, maybe you'll lose your job. But usually, it just changes jobs. So I'm not that worried about complete elimination of millions of jobs. But if it makes it more productive, yeah, hey, more power, right? Final thoughts, George.
I think for the tech industry, this is a golden age. People like Sundar, says this is, as big as fire. And just putting meat on the bones of that, I go back to saying we've never had a tech transition that's accelerated both the demand for software and the underlying
I
compute,
like that. Yeah.
and accelerated the supply. We've never seen that before. Our challenge, though, is to make it so that everyone feels like they're part of this acceleration, not just the knowledge, workers. That it makes, healthcare and healthcare, like knowledge and assistance, accessible to people who couldn't get it before. That it makes everyone's job more productive, or that they get access to expertise that they couldn't get before. If this only helps the laptop class, we're going to have much worse than polarization.
Sam Altman was at Dreamforce last week, and he made a similar point, that it's just remarkable to see how there are users that I guess we never would have imagined being comfortable, getting into the system. And I've heard competitors of OpenAI say that's the best thing they did, was make the UI so much more comfortable with a common man, so and common woman. So yeah, I like where you're going. They're accelerating demand and supply. Very few technologies do that. So, George, fantastic perspectives. Thanks again. Let's do this every few months. Let's not wait a couple, 3 years again.
Okay, my pleasure.